Welcome to week 7 of this Enneagram Devotional Study. Today we are going to be talking about stress arrows, which is personally one of my very favorite topics about the Enneagram. I think the whole theory of stress arrows and stress seasons is a super helpful one. And you probably could tell that by reading the devotionals. I have a lot to say about it. I really like this and I think it can be really helpful. So let's jump in. When we are talking about stress, so when you look at the Enneagram symbol in general and you see all those lines, those are called arrows. And the one of them is going to be your stress number and one of them is going to be your growth number. And that's not something that just by looking at the symbol you can tell. There are certain symbols, certain graphs that they'll have different, like where the arrow is pointing will mean which one is your stress and growth. I personally have them memorized, but you can definitely look up which one means what and all that sort of thing, because you can't tell it just by looking at the symbol. But it's important to see which number is your stress and which one is your growth, because in seasons of stress, we will take on some of the negative behaviors of our stress number as a way to cope with the stress. And in growth, we need to dive in deeper to the more positive aspects of our growth number in order to achieve substantial growth. And so they're very important to know about. But for stress, seasons of stress, if you can look back in your life, you probably can think of at least 2 or 3 pretty vivid seasons of stress in your life. These are seasons where you feel like you're surviving. They are seasons that are intense, seasons with tears, seasons with pain. A lot of seasons of transition are seasons of stress. And why I like the word season in general is because these times tend to be at least 2 weeks, if not years long. They are actual seasons. And no, you might not be acting out in these behaviors 100% of the time, all of these seasons, and it's not like you can't have other coping mechanisms to deal with the stress. But how these work is that it's like you have a bottle, and the more stressed you are, the faster this bottle will fill, and then these coping mechanisms will spill out. And you'll see just this pattern of these kind of behaviors throughout every season of stress you've ever had. And I know for myself, learning about the Enneagram and learning about stress seasons has really helped me to be able to identify stress as I'm going through it. Not later, because hindsight is 2020, looking back and being like, oh my gosh, I was stressed for 3 years there. That was so intense and so painful. But in the midst of it, while you're surviving, while everything's feeling chaotic, being like, wait a minute, this is a red flag. This is stressing me out more than I'm giving it credit for. And I need to be gentle with myself and I need to choose something better. Because coping mechanisms, and the end of the day, these coping mechanisms specifically, often promise something that they can't deliver on. So we need to be careful not to be relying on them as something that can fix everything, because they can't. So let's go over where each type goes in stress and what this can look like, just very briefly, because I could spend hours on this. But hopefully you read your devotionals. You guys will continue to talk about it and you'll learn a lot. But let's just quickly go through this. So Enneagram Type 1s, when they are stressed, go to Enneagram Type 4s. So how this tends to look is they'll become more hopeless and very overly emotional. What ones need when they're stressed is they need to actually emotionally process and let emotion out. How the 4 promises to help them with this is by over-emoting and giving into hopelessness, which actually does not help them actually fully emotionally process what's going on. Type 2s, when they are in seasons of stress, go to Type 8. What they experience is becoming angry, frustrated, irritable. There's a lot of hostility that can go on in the hearts of 2s when they're very stressed. And what's happening is 2s need control. They just want to control what's happening. They want to help people. They want to make this not be happening. And instead, they will settle for a feeling of false control and false power in the moment that anger gives them. For Type 3s, they go to Type 9 in stress, and they will become slothful and often given to a lot of numbing behaviors. And what 3s actually need when they're stressed, what they're longing for, is rest. They need rest, but instead they will settle for numbing, because In the moment, numbing is basically a very cheap form of rest. It makes it so you don't have to think about what's going on instead of actually fully recharging. For type 4s, they go to type 2 in stress. So they can become clingy, fixated on relationships, especially what's wrong in relationships. And what 4s really need when they are stressed is love. But instead, they will settle for cheap affirmation and especially relationships that they aren't fully invested in. Like cheap affirmation is like people you don't even fully know, like telling you how amazing you are. It's cheap because they don't fully know you. Like it's not this like I am fully known and I'm fully loved. Like that's what we actually want. So type 5s, when they are in seasons of stress, go to type 7, and they will become flustered and often give into a lot of gluttony behaviors. And what 5s really need is some sort of relief, like relief from the stress that's going on, relief from the situation. But instead, they will settle for this gluttony, which gives them like a high, which is distracting from whatever is going on. And that doesn't necessarily actually give them relief. The high is just like you have to come down from a high. And so oftentimes it can just make it worse. For type 6s, they go to type 3 when they are stressed, and they become competitive and often overworking. If a 6 doesn't have a job, sometimes they will overwork in relationships and feel almost 2-ish in how pleasy they are in the relationships. What 6s really need in seasons of stress is security. They need to know that whatever they're trying to firmly grasp with both hands is going to stay theirs. And instead, they will settle for false security as this, like, I am doing everything I can. I am pouring my life out into this thing. I'm not giving into any cheap pleasures. I am fully pouring myself into work or this relationship or whatever it is as a way of feeling false security because they don't actually have the control they are letting themselves believe that they do have. For type 7s, they go to Enneagram 1s in seasons of stress. This can make them become critical and have a lot of energy towards like organizing, cleaning, perfecting things. For Enneagram type 7s, what they really need when they are stressed is order, like something to be going right, some sort of order, but they will actually settle for this like false perfection, this criticizing of the things that are happening both inside of them and outside of them, as a way of feeling like they do have order and they do have some control over the environment, but ultimately they don't. And especially when you're criticizing yourself and other people, you're not making any friends, and you are not you're not actually getting to control something in a positive way. Enneagram type 8s, when they are in seasons of stress, they go to Enneagram type 5. This looks like withdrawing and disappearing, basically. And why this is because when 8s are stressed, they need to be safe. And one of the things that feels the most unsafe to 8s is vulnerability. And when they are in seasons of stress, the vulnerability is right there at the surface. And so they almost don't trust themselves to go be around people with that guard down. And so they will withdraw completely. And we'll even see some behaviors of like fixating on something. I think it's just a way of them keeping their energy focused towards like isolation and being alone is by fixating on these things. But it's very interesting, and 8s definitely know that they do it, and it's definitely a protective. They'll settle for isolation instead of actually being safe because isolation in the moment will feel the most safe. For type 9s, they go to type 6. And what they will experience there is becoming anxious and trying to prevent anything else from happening. Type 9s will become so overwhelmed and stressed. What they want is prevention. Like, I want to prevent anything else from going wrong, but what they'll settle for is worst case scenario thinking and being anxious, like having this very anxious mindset of like, okay, I need to prevent anything else from going on. But then all of a sudden you're thinking of all these different scenarios of things that could go wrong, and you're agonizing over them, and you can't sleep and all these things, and it's not helpful towards the situation. You are compiling stress onto yourself by fixating on what could go wrong or how someone might be seeing you or might have taken what you said, and creating all that stress inside yourself. It's kind of like a volcano. So as you heard all these things, Some of you might have just had a huge light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, I definitely do that. Or you hearing someone else that you might know, something that they definitely do. And I think that there's something really important here of when we are in stress seasons, we cannot expect from ourselves what we can expect from ourselves in growth seasons. So maybe if you know that you are going through a season of stress, like what is some way that you can be kind to yourself, that you can give up something, that you can delegate something to let yourself have some pressure relieved from yourself in the stress season, because especially a lot of stress seasons are very ongoing. There's a lot of things that happen in our life that, like seasons of grief and transition and all these things. Like, what are some things you can take off your plate that can make this a little easier for you, just to relieve some of that pressure? Because the biggest hindrance that can happen in seasons of stress is expecting ourselves to behave like we are in a season of growth. And let me tell you, friends, it just doesn't work. And so as we go to your leader and we go through these questions, just keep that in mind. Especially, I'm sure a lot of you guys sitting in this room are in a season of stress. I am recording these at the end of 2021, but we just the last 2 years have gone through this worldwide pandemic, and especially the first 6 months of which I think we were all collectively in a season of stress. And so I would not be surprised if that's a lot of that's ongoing for you guys. So just be very conscious of that for yourself and for other people. Definitely keep each other in your prayers if you know someone else is going through a stress season, because the temptation to cope is very strong. And so as you guys go to your leader, just keep that in mind.